Look, let's face facts. We can't exactly trust Valve to release Half-Life 3 in the next millennia. They don't seem motivated to do it, despite the hype behind it. So in order to keep the dreams of a dystopian universe and a mute scientist alive, the fans of the series have turned to fan creations such as Black Mesa. And now, we have the Valve-approved Prospekt. Developed by one single developer, Richard Seabrook, Prospekt released on February 17th for $9.99. It continues the story of Half-Life opposing forces Adrian Shepard, as he tries to help out Gordon Freeman in what seems to be an endless struggle, now that Valve has other franchises they are focusing on. So the real question is, will Prospekt strike gold in reviving the Half-Life franchise? Or is it more Pyrite, shiny on the surface but lacking substance underneath? That's what I'm here to answer, but before I begin, this key was obtained from the developer for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So let's get this out of the way first. Remember Half-Life 2? Remember the combat and the gameplay overall? Yeah, that's what you can expect here, because it's the same engine, relatively the same gameplay, and the same AI that was from the game that was released in 2004. Now, the game does have some upgrades in textures and graphics here and there, but gameplay-wise, it's pretty much what I remember from the original. Adrian's job here is simple: kill bad guys in his way and get to the next set point in the story. Your standard selection of weapons are here with no new additions: SMGs, assault rifles, shotguns, the basics. They all have reasonable punch and have alternate firing mechanisms, such as the glowing orb of death. But you've used these weapons before, and there isn't that much variety in the end. I will say that one thing that did surprise me was the grenades. They don't seem to do jack shit most of the time. Now maybe I'm not remembering my Half-Life experience very well, but I thought they had a little bit more of a pop than a little explosion that may be able to take out one enemy if I'm really lucky. Now the combat hasn't changed that much, and it's more pure adrenaline than the modern day FPS. You'll be running for cover, of course, but in a good amount of situations, you'll be able to tank the damage while moving around like a jackrabbit hopped up on Adderall. But when things get crazy in this game, they get really crazy, and you'll need to pull out all the stops in order to survive. Even on normal difficulty, you'll probably die a reasonable amount, or at least I did. And I'm a TF2 veteran. I'm good at FPS games, I swear. Control-wise, it's Half-Life 2. No, seriously, it's the same damn engine. You have the ability to sprint, you have the hops, and you can adjust the sensitivity appropriately for your style of shooting. Now there is a looseness in the control scheme, but that's countered by the fact that it is a 10-year-old engine it's working with. Enemy-wise, the game starts off strong with some good variety with enemies like robotic spiders and the occasional antlion swarm. But sadly, that doesn't keep up, as the Combine really takes over towards the middle section of the game. Unfortunately, there was a lack of headcrabs and zombies, and a Half-Life 2 influenced game without an abundance of headcrabs does feel off in several ways. Enemies can take entire clips to take down, and the AI isn't exactly the greatest in terms of combat. They like to be lambs to the slaughter. Now granted, their enthusiasm to die, plus their ability to take a clip to the face, can be a deadly combination at times. But that's why you use the environment to your advantage. Sometimes a good door can be your best friend. You want to come in? No? Alright, I'll just do the job. Speaking of that difficulty, one big factor is that your enemy is not insanely accurate at long range, and you are probably a little better equipped in that regard. Some sections of the game don't exactly pose a challenge because of this, especially if you know how to exploit the AI. But overall, the difficulty curve is reasonable for the most part, with two big exceptions. These difficult sections of the game have a couple of problems behind them, but the biggest one has to do with level design. There are particular areas that are either way too open with multiple spawn points, allowing for enemies to flank you rather easily without any opposition, or environment elements that you activate that drastically reduce your health. The game throws everything and the kitchen sink at you, so sometimes you really have to get creative. I decided to play Harry Potter in this clip in an attempt to not be in the open. because I felt like I needed to be a wizard in order to actually make it through this section. And it actually worked well, till I ran out of ammo. Minor detail. Now the game isn't all gunplay. In fact, the game is at its best when it's sprinkling other elements to break it up. There will be situations that fighting won't exactly work for you, as enemy after enemy will come, and it's best to find the exit and get out of dodge before you run out of ammo and health. The game will try to change up things once in a while, with you having to use your head or do some basic platforming. They can be hit or miss at times, but overall, they hit more than they whiff. These turrets, for example, while simple, did provide a slight challenge in terms of placement, despite the fact that it really came down to running behind the appropriate barriers. When the game does keep this variety up at a steady pace, like introducing a low-gravity platforming section, it really does help the overall product. I did appreciate small sections, like the drop-down section with the energy orbs, having to time your drops and watch for what's coming. Again, these puzzles are not the most clever of designs, but they do a good job of fitting into the world and actually feeling natural, rather than forced in there like Roman Reigns as the top babyface in WWE. Wrestling joke, folks, wrestling joke. But the game does go too far at times with its elements, in particular with cramped hallways and attempting to maneuver physics elements. Now, while this is comical, the amount of R-rated words coming out of my mouth while trying to get this barrel into position didn't exactly reflect well on me as a person. Now, story-wise, I have to admit something here. I never played Opposing Force. I'm sorry, I just never got around to it. So to say that I was a little lost would be an understatement. Now, I get the gist of what they were going for, but the storytelling here is done mostly through these trippy flashbacks, and visually, they made me want to throw up. Now, these little sections try to give characterizations to the Marines in question, and some of them work alright, but some of them, they just feel off. I mean, granted, this will come down to a personal taste thing, and I may be missing some context with some of the stuff from Opposing Force, but some things feel like they were forced in their delivery.
He kept staring at Sheps, too. Maybe some of Shepard's sweet ass. Had to go for the gauge check right off the bat, huh?
Now, despite the fact that the direct dialogue storytelling was off, the atmosphere wasn't. The game's little touches with atmosphere was done rather well, as moving through the grates and letting the game get a little bit of a jump on you were still there. No, I didn't jump at this head crab. I have no idea what you're talking about. But even the early game with the decayed facility, this feels like a Half-Life game. I like the smaller storytelling elements here, making you wonder what exactly has been happening since you've been away from the franchise. And despite the voice acting being competent, the more natural in-game elements, like this clip where the Combine captures you, does a lot better by showing and not telling. If the game did more of this, it would have resonated a lot better with me. But the game does fail in one major element: punch. There's no KO punch, there's no finisher, there's no fatality, there's no trap card, and there's no onslaught of destruction. The game is a side story of the series, but that doesn't mean a big boss couldn't come into play, or some drastic plot twist could happen. The major problem here is that in a couple days' time, I'll forget that I played Prospekt, which you don't really want to say about the game that you've just played. Overall, Prospekt was a good nostalgic trip into the depths of the Half-Life engine, and I can see the influences of the franchise within its content. But beyond its Half-Life roots, it doesn't really do much different. It's a nice stroll down memory lane, and those who want to remember the Half-Life experience will probably enjoy what the game has to offer. But it shows its age in several bad ways, and the narrative, it just doesn't come together very well. And finally, it just lacks oomph. It comes in at a 65 on my scoring scale, meaning that most players should wait for a significant sale or cheap price before picking it up, even though the game is $10. However, that does not take into account my enhancer system. So let's take a look at the enhancers. Add 15 points to the score if you want to relive nostalgia with Half-Life gameplay and atmosphere. Now, the game thrives on feeling like an extension of the Half-Life gameplay, plain and simple. If you wanted that feeling and nothing more than that, then this game is pretty much a godsend for you, and it makes it right up your alley for a purchase. Now note, I'm specifically mentioning the gameplay here, because while it does that well, it doesn't do this well. You take 5 points off if you wanted significant narrative Half-Life experiences. The game unfortunately just doesn't capture the main plot points well in its chosen presentation here for the Half-Life lore. Sure, it's cool to see the Marines and a little bit of the behind the scenes, but honestly, it just doesn't do a great job of natural storytelling. Take off 10 points if you're expecting gameplay evolution. If you're looking for the gameplay to be taken to another level, don't bother with Prospekt. It's Half-Life gameplay at its core, nothing new, no new mechanics, and is basically relying on the nostalgic gameplay of the first 2 games. Anyway, that's it for the review. Next on the plate for those curious will most likely be Super Galaxy Squadron, and Danganronpa will be right after that. Then the 2 weeks are literally packed to the brim with keys that I've received. Anyway, see you all later, and keep on gaming. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, hit that like button, maybe share it with a friend. I write an appropriate Steam review that you can find in the description below for games on Steam, and I'll respond to any comments below regarding questions about the game and feedback about the video. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button, and you can check out my last video in the top left and a related video in the top right. You want to keep this channel running as well? Then consider supporting my work on Patreon, which you can find in the description below, along with my Google Plus page, Facebook group, and Twitter handle. This is Dragnick signing out, and keep on gaming.